Battle of Alte Veste, 1632. In the thick forests of Bavaria, 1632, two armies clashed on a fog-laden ridge outside Nuremberg, not for glory, but for survival. One army was led by Gustavus Adolphus, the so-called Lion of the North, hailed as the Protestant savior of Europe. The other was commanded by the cunning and ruthless Imperial general Alrech von Wallenstein. What followed at the Alte Veste wasn't a decisive victory or a sweeping battle, it was a brutal, grinding siege that would deflate Protestant hopes and expose the harsh realities of 17th-century warfare. This was one of the most frustrating and overlooked turning points of the 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War, a European catastrophe. To understand the Battle of Alte Veste, we must first understand the context that produced it. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, was not merely a war of religion, it was a series of conflicts that drew in almost every major power in Europe. What began as a Bohemian revolt against the Holy Roman Emperor quickly spiraled into a continent-wide struggle involving Protestants and Catholics, monarchs and mercenaries, national rivalries and personal ambitions. By 1632, the war had entered its Swedish phase. Sweden, under King Gustavus Adolphus, had entered the fray in 1630. With financial backing from France, ironically a Catholic nation, Sweden aimed to curb Habsburg power and protect Protestant interests in the Holy Roman Empire. The rise of Gustavus Adolphus. Gustavus Adolphus wasn't just any monarch. He was a gifted military reformer who had turned the Swedish army into one of the most modern and effective fighting forces in Europe. His troops were well-drilled, highly mobile, and used coordinated infantry and artillery tactics that stood in stark contrast to the ponderous methods of his enemies. By 1631, Gustavus had stunned Europe with his victory at the Battle of Breitenfeld, smashing the forces of Count Tilly and breathing new life into the Protestant cause. Town after town began to fall to the Swedes. Gustavus was hailed as a liberator, and his campaign swept through central Germany. Enter Wallenstein. But the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II still had a card to play, Alrech von Wallenstein. Dismissed from imperial service in 1630 due to his growing political power and perceived arrogance, Wallenstein was recalled in 1632 as the empire faced disaster. He was given a free hand to raise an army and confront the Swedish threat. Wallenstein was a different kind of general. Unlike Gustavus, who led from the front and inspired his men by example, Wallenstein was cerebral, aloof, and deeply calculating. His strategy emphasized maneuver, fortification, and attrition rather than open battle. He didn't need to win spectacularly, he just needed to make Gustavus fail. The strategic situation in summer 1632. In the summer of 1632, Wallenstein moved quickly to secure Bohemia and then advanced into Bavaria, linking up with Maximilian of Bavaria, his Catholic ally. Together, they posed a direct threat to Swedish-occupied southern Germany. Gustavus responded by marching south from his headquarters in Mainz, determined to relieve the Protestant city of Nuremberg, which was being threatened by imperial forces. What resulted was not a field battle in the traditional sense, but a complex and grueling siege on terrain that would favor the defender, and ultimately stall Gustavus's momentum. The terrain, Alte Veste Ridge. The site of the conflict was a heavily forested ridge known as the Alte Veste, Old Fortress, located just west of Nuremberg. On this elevated ground stood the ruins of an old castle, surrounded by dense woods and rugged slopes. Wallenstein had entrenched his army there with astonishing thoroughness, creating a labyrinth of fortifications, earthworks, trenches, abatis, felled trees with sharpened branches, and gun emplacements. His camp was well supplied and defensible. Gustavus, meanwhile, was in a less favorable position. His army, numbering about 18,000 men, was quartered in and around Nuremberg and suffering from lack of supplies. Disease and hunger were spreading. The Swedish king knew that unless he acted, morale and support would collapse. The assault, September 3, 1632. On September 3, Gustavus Adolphus launched a full-scale assault on the Alte Veste. His plan was ambitious, a coordinated, multi-pronged attack aimed at overwhelming Wallenstein's defenses. But almost immediately, problems emerged. The wooded terrain made movement and coordination difficult. Thick underbrush, steep slopes, and concealed trenches broke up Swedish formations. The attack was led by elite Swedish infantry and supported by cavalry, but progress was slow and bloody. Artillery was largely ineffective in the forested landscape. Worse, Wallenstein had placed sharpshooters and musketeers behind hidden ramparts, who poured fire onto the advancing Swedes. A battle of attrition. Rather than a dramatic clash of armies in open field, the Battle of Alte Veste devolved into a brutal, close-quarter struggle, tree by tree, trench by trench. Swedish soldiers found themselves pinned down, ambushed, and unable to bring their superior mobility to bear. Gustavus himself rode into danger to rally his men, but even his presence could not turn the tide. The attack bogged down over several hours. Rain began to fall, turning the battlefield into a slippery mess. After over 12 hours of fighting, Gustavus ordered a withdrawal. He had lost roughly 2,500 men, while Wallenstein's casualties were around 1,000. The ridge remained in Imperial hands. The Swedish army was bloodied, exhausted, and still hungry. Why Gustavus attacked? Historians have long debated why Gustavus chose to attack such a strong position. Several theories exist. Desperation, his army was running out of food and supplies. A decisive victory was needed to break the deadlock and restore morale. Political pressure, he needed to maintain the perception of Swedish invincibility to keep German Protestant states loyal. Overconfidence, flush with earlier victories, Gustavus may have underestimated Wallenstein's preparedness in the difficulty of the terrain. Wallenstein's strategy of denial. Wallenstein's refusal to give battle an open field was not cowardice, it was deliberate. He understood that Gustavus's strength lay in maneuver warfare and open engagements. By forcing the Swedes to attack a fortified camp on unfavorable terrain, he flipped the advantage. This battle exemplifies Wallenstein's approach: frustrate, delay, and demoralize. He didn't need to destroy Gustavus's army, he just needed to exhaust it. The psychological blow. The Battle of Alte Veste was not a catastrophic defeat for the Swedes, but it was a sobering one. Gustavus's aura of invincibility had been pierced. His failure to dislodge Wallenstein raised questions among allies and emboldened enemies. It also revealed the limitations of Swedish power projection deep in the empire. Without constant resupply and local support, Gustavus's army was vulnerable. Wallenstein's reputation restored. For Wallenstein, the battle was a strategic success. He had checked the advance of the most feared general in Europe without risking a full battle. His political standing was restored, and he regained influence at the imperial court. However, his reluctance to follow up with an aggressive counteroffensive drew criticism. Some imperial allies believed he could have crushed the Swedish army. Wallenstein, always cautious, refused to gamble. Prelude to Lutzen. The confrontation at Alte Veste set the stage for the next major engagement, the Battle of Lutzen in November 1632. There, the two commanders would meet again under vastly different circumstances. Lutzen would prove to be one of the bloodiest battles of the war, and Gustavus's last. Alte Veste also marked a shift in Gustavus's strategic approach. He became more cautious in the final months of 1632, perhaps shaken by the experience of trying to force a decision where none could be gained. The broader context. Alte Veste is often overlooked in broader narratives of the 30 Years' War, but it serves as a microcosm of the conflict. The futility of decisive battle in a war of attrition. The role of fortification in terrain and limiting battlefield options. The enormous logistical and political pressures on commanders. Wallenstein's camp at Alte Veste was not just a military stronghold, it was a symbol of the new kind of warfare, drawn out, fortified, and deeply destructive to civilian populations caught in the middle. A reflection on forgotten fronts. The Battle of Alte Veste was not glorious. It wasn't decisive. But it mattered. It showed the limits of even the greatest commanders when faced with stubborn geography, entrenched defenses, and dwindling supplies. It marked a moment where strategy outmaneuvered daring, and where ambition was humbled by the brutal realities of war. What can we learn from Alte Veste? That not all losses are defeats, and not all victories are won on the field. Sometimes, endurance is the greatest weapon. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a lesser-known but vital moment in the 30 Years' War, be sure to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to know what happened next, don't miss our upcoming video, Battle of Tarentum, 212 BC, Hannibal's masterstroke in southern Italy. You won't want to miss that one.